Human shielded the alien girl during the tribunal, but his defense broke an ancient law. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Our story begins on the distant planet of Zarth, a world where the ancient customs of the alien race known as the Zraxi still hold sway. The Zraxi, tall and regal, with shimmering violet skin, had a society deeply rooted in their old ways, laws that have remained unchanged for centuries. Among them, one law stood as the foundation of their judicial system: never, under any circumstances, could an outsider interfere with the tribunal. The tribunal was sacred. A trial where the Zraxi people decided the fate of their own, and to intervene, even with the purest of intentions, was a crime punishable by exile or worse. But one man, a human named Jack Wilson, did not know this law. He only knew what he saw before him: a young alien girl, Liara, trembling in the presence of the tribunal. Her silver eyes darted nervously as the council's gaze fell upon her. Liara, with her pale green skin and delicate features, stood accused of a crime she did not commit. It was a misunderstanding, one born from cultural differences, but the Zraxi were not known for mercy. Jack had been assigned as the human ambassador's bodyguard, a job that kept him at the fringes of their affairs. But when the tribunal convened and Liara's fate was sealed, Jack couldn't stand by. He had to do something. He didn't know how to help her, but he knew he couldn't just watch. As the proceedings continued, Jack found himself moving forward, stepping into the center of the chamber, between the Zraxi council and the accused. The Zraxi leader, a towering figure of deep purple skin, stared at him in disbelief. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Jack's heart raced in his chest. He was breaking a law that carried consequences beyond his understanding. But Jack wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about Liara, her scared face, her trembling hands, and the injustice she faced. "I won't let this happen," Jack said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You dare defy the tribunal, human?" The weight of his words hung in the air. Jack's mind raced. "She's innocent," he said, stepping closer to the girl. "She's not guilty of what you accuse her of." The council members exchanged glances, some shocked, others intrigued. Jack's chest tightened as he realized the gravity of what he had just done. The tension in the room was palpable. Jack stood firm, his heart pounding as the council deliberated in hushed tones. His defense was genuine, but it was a breach of the laws that governed this alien society. And in that moment, Jack knew his life, and perhaps Liara's, would never be the same again. Jack stood there, facing the Zraxi council, his heart racing as the weight of his actions began to settle in. The room had fallen into a heavy silence, the air thick with tension. He had broken an ancient law, one that could cost him everything: his freedom, his life, or even worse, the wrath of an entire civilization. But as he looked at Liara, standing trembling in front of the tribunal, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Her wide, silver eyes were filled with fear, but beneath it, Jack could see something else: hope. A flicker of belief that someone was standing up for her, when no one else had. The leader of the council, a tall, regal figure with dark violet skin, leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Jack. "You have broken the sacred law, human," the leader's voice boomed, low and commanding. "You dare to defend an alien who has been judged by our people. This is an unforgivable act." Jack felt the sting of those words, but he stood his ground. His jaw tightened, and his hands, though clenched into fists, were steady. "I know," Jack replied, his voice calm but firm. "But it's wrong. She's innocent." "You have to listen to her side." The leader of the council raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You speak of innocence as if you understand the weight of our laws. The Zraxi have lived by these rules for millennia. They protect us, guide us, and keep our society in balance. You are a foreigner here, human. You have no right to challenge our ways." Jack's gaze never wavered. He knew what he was up against, but the thought of leaving Liara to face her fate alone made him feel like he had no choice but to fight. "I may not know your laws," Jack said, "but I know what's right. What's happening here is wrong. She's not the criminal. Your law is." There was a moment of stillness before the room erupted into murmurs. Some of the council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, while others looked at Jack with open contempt. Liara, standing at the edge of the chamber, looked between Jack and the council, her silver eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and confusion. She had been told her fate was sealed, and yet here was this human, defying everything to protect her. Jack turned slightly, meeting her gaze for a brief moment. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, hoping to convey strength and determination despite the overwhelming odds. Liara's lips trembled as if she was trying to hold back tears, but she didn't say a word. Jack could feel the weight of the entire tribunal pressing down on him, but he couldn't stop now. He had to continue, for her sake. The leader of the council stood from his seat, his long, flowing robe rippling with authority. "You are a fool, human. And you will pay for this arrogance." Jack's stomach tightened, but he refused to back down. "Then I'll pay," he said. "But I won't let you condemn her." The leader's expression shifted, the slightest hint of amusement crossing his face. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions. The Zraxi do not forgive easily. Breaking our laws is a matter of life and death. And you, human, will learn that soon enough." The words hit Jack hard, but he held firm, refusing to let the fear creep into his heart. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Liara. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. Jack turned his attention back to Liara, his voice quieter now, but still full of conviction. "I promise you, I won't let them take you." As he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test everything he believed in. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew this: he couldn't walk away from her. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the room was unbearable. The Zraxi council members had fallen silent, their piercing gazes fixed on Jack as if they were assessing not just his actions, but his very soul. Jack could feel the weight of their judgment, but he refused to let it break him. His eyes flicked to Liara, who was still standing behind him, her fragile form barely visible in the shadow of the towering figures before them. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were locked on Jack with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. He could sense her fear, but also something else: hope. Hope that someone was fighting for her. The leader of the council, the tallest and most imposing of them all, stepped forward. His deep purple skin seemed to shimmer under the chamber's lights, and his long robe trailed behind him like a wave of authority. "You stand here, human," the leader began, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable threat, "and defy everything we hold sacred. This is not a trial. This is not a matter for your people. You are a mere outsider in our world, and yet you dare to speak as if you understand the ways of the Zraxi." Jack swallowed hard, but his voice didn't waver. "I don't need to understand your laws to know that she's innocent. She's being condemned for something that's not her fault." The leader's lips curled into a cold smile. "Innocence has nothing to do with this, human. Our laws are not based on what is right or wrong in your eyes. They are based on tradition, on what has kept our people strong for millennia. And you have just shattered that tradition with your interference." Jack's heart sank, but he didn't let his resolve crack. He stepped forward, meeting the leader's gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to argue about your traditions," he said firmly. "I'm here to make sure she's not punished for something she didn't do. No tradition is worth hurting an innocent person." The silence that followed was heavy, like the calm before a storm. The council members exchanged glances, some clearly agitated, while others seemed intrigued by Jack's words. Liara, though still trembling, took a small step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't do this," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I never meant for this to happen. I never." She stopped herself, tears welling in her eyes. Jack turned to her, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer her some comfort, though he knew there was little he could do in that moment to take away her fear. You don't have to explain yourself, Liara, he said softly. You've done nothing wrong. The council seemed unmoved by their exchange, but Jack could feel the power in his words, the truth in his heart. The leader of the council, however, was not impressed. He crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze narrowing. You misunderstand, human, he said slowly. This is not just a matter of innocence. This is a matter of honor. Your interference has dishonored the Zraxi. And that, you cannot undo. Jack felt the words strike him like a physical blow, but he stood tall. Then I'll take the consequences, he said, his voice unwavering. But I will not let an innocent person suffer for a crime she didn't commit. I'll fight to my last breath to see that she's treated fairly. The room fell into silence once again, the council members still weighing their options. Jack could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears, but he kept his eyes on Liara, her gaze still fixed on him, a quiet plea for help in her eyes. The leader of the council finally spoke, his voice low and measured. Very well, he said. You have spoken your truth, human. But know this, by defending her, you have broken a law that is as old as our people. You will be held accountable for this breach. And there will be no mercy. Jack's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. This was it, the moment of truth. The moment where everything could change. I'll face whatever punishment you give me, Jack said, his voice steady. But I'm not walking away without her. The leader's eyes flicked to Liara, then back to Jack. You are a fool, he said softly, but perhaps, a fool with heart. We will see how your fate unfolds. The tribunal has spoken, and it will be so. Jack stood there, defiant, as the council members slowly began to rise, their expressions unreadable. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure, he had made the right choice. And no matter the cost, he would never let Liara face the tribunal alone. The council chamber was silent as Jack stood his ground, the weight of their gazes pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let fear take over. Liara was still standing behind him, her fragile form small in comparison to the towering figures of the council, but her presence gave him strength. The leader of the council, still standing at the head of the room, narrowed his eyes as he regarded Jack. You are foolish, human. Your actions have broken the most sacred of our laws, and there will be consequences. Jack swallowed hard but kept his voice steady. I did what I had to do, he said. And I'll face whatever punishment you give me. But I won't let you condemn her. The leader's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. You think your courage will protect her? It will not. You are an outsider, and your interference has dishonored the tribunal. Jack stood taller, the weight of his words carrying more conviction than he expected. Then I will take responsibility for my actions, he replied. But I will not stand by while an innocent is punished. A flicker of something, perhaps admiration or disbelief, crossed the leader's face, but it disappeared quickly. He turned to the rest of the council, and Jack could see the unease in their eyes. Some were angry, others seemed conflicted, and a few even looked curious. Jack's resolve hardened. You may be able to take everything else from me, he said, but you won't take my integrity. And you won't take her. The leader of the council raised his hand, signaling the others to quiet down. Enough, he said. We will decide your fate later, human. But know this, by defying us, you have made an enemy of the Zraxi. There will be no easy way out for you. Jack nodded slowly. I'm prepared to face whatever comes. But I won't back down. The council murmured again, and the leader's gaze flicked toward Liara, who had been standing silently behind Jack the entire time. She looked fragile, like a bird caught in a storm, but Jack saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was the hope he had given her when he stepped in front of her and spoke out. And that was enough to keep him going. The leader gestured for the guards to escort Jack and Liara out of the chamber. As they left the room, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of what he had done, but he also knew something had shifted. He had done what he thought was right, and in doing so, he had ignited a spark of something that could change everything. The long corridors of the palace were eerily quiet as the guards led them to their temporary quarters. Jack's mind raced as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The consequences of his actions still loomed large, but he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride in standing up for what was right. As they entered the room, Liara spoke for the first time since the tribunal. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack turned to her, his heart swelling. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I just couldn't let them do that to you." Liara's silver eyes glistened as she looked at him, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimpse of something he hadn't expected: trust. She wasn't just thankful. She was beginning to believe in him. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "You didn't give up on me." Jack smiled gently. "I won't ever give up on you." As they sat down, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be much more complicated than he had ever imagined. But one thing was certain: he had just made the first step toward changing the fate of an entire world, and he wasn't about to stop now. The council chamber was silent as Jack stood his ground, the weight of their gazes pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let fear take over. Liara was still standing behind him, her fragile form small in comparison to the towering figures of the council, but her presence gave him strength. The leader of the council, still standing at the head of the room, narrowed his eyes as he regarded Jack. "You are foolish, human. Your actions have broken the most sacred of our laws, and there will be consequences." Jack swallowed hard but kept his voice steady. "I did what I had to do," he said. "And I'll face whatever punishment you give me. But I won't let you condemn her." The leader's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You think your courage will protect her? It will not. You are an outsider, and your interference has dishonored the tribunal." Jack stood taller, the weight of his words carrying more conviction than he expected. "Then I will take responsibility for my actions," he replied. "But I will not stand by while an innocent is punished." A flicker of something, perhaps admiration or disbelief, crossed the leader's face, but it disappeared quickly. He turned to the rest of the council, and Jack could see the unease in their eyes. Some were angry, others seemed conflicted, and a few even looked curious. Jack's resolve hardened. "You may be able to take everything else from me," he said, "but you won't take my integrity. And you won't take her." The leader of the council raised his hand, signaling the others to quiet down. "Enough," he said. "We will decide your fate later, human. But know this: by defying us, you have made an enemy of the Zraxi. There will be no easy way out for you." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm prepared to face whatever comes. But I won't back down." The council murmured again, and the leader's gaze flicked toward Liara, who had been standing silently behind Jack the entire time. She looked fragile, like a bird caught in a storm, but Jack saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was the hope he had given her when he stepped in front of her and spoke out. And that was enough to keep him going. The leader gestured for the guards to escort Jack and Liara out of the chamber. As they left the room, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of what he had done, but he also knew something had shifted. He had done what he thought was right, and in doing so, he had ignited a spark of something that could change everything. The long corridors of the palace were eerily quiet as the guards led them to their temporary quarters. Jack's mind raced as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The consequences of his actions still loomed large, but he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride in standing up for what was right. As they entered the room, Liara spoke for the first time since the tribunal. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack turned to her, his heart swelling. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I just couldn't let them do that to you." Liara's silver eyes glistened as she looked at him, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimpse of something he hadn't expected: trust. She wasn't just thankful. She was beginning to believe in him. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "You didn't give up on me." Jack smiled gently. "I won't ever give up on you." As they sat down, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be much more complicated than he had ever imagined. But one thing was certain: he had just made the first step toward changing the fate of an entire world, and he wasn't about to stop now. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling quiet. Jack and Liara were confined to their quarters, the silence of the palace pressing down on them like a heavy weight. The Zraxi had not yet decided on Jack's fate, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jack found himself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the consequences of his actions to finally catch up with him. But despite the heavy atmosphere, there was something comforting about the small moments he shared with Liara. As they sat together in their room, Jack couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in Liara. She was no longer the frightened girl she had been when they first met. There was a quiet strength about her now, something that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore, she was becoming someone who would fight for her own future. Jack watched her as she stared out of the window, her eyes focused on the distant horizon, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. Liara turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm just thinking," she said, her voice soft. "Thinking about what?" "About everything," she replied, her gaze drifting toward the stars outside. "About how my life changed in the blink of an eye. One moment, I was just another citizen of Zarth, and the next, she trailed off, as if the weight of her words was too much to bear. Jack stood and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know it's been a lot to take in," he said. "But you're not alone in this." Liara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that Jack couldn't quite name. "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done," she said quietly. Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to repay me. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the window as if the stars outside held the answers to the questions she couldn't yet put into words. Jack watched her, a quiet determination building inside him. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to back down. He had fought for Liara before, and he would continue to fight for her. There was still much to be done, and the Zraxi Council hadn't yet decided how they would respond to his defiance. Jack knew that the consequences would come soon, but for now, he would take solace in the moments he had with Liara. As the days passed, the tension between them began to shift, like the air before a storm. They spoke less, but the bond between them grew stronger with every passing moment. Jack could feel it in the way Liara's presence seemed to fill the space around them. There was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding that neither of them could fully express. In the quiet of the room, with nothing but the soft hum of the palace's systems around them, Jack found himself thinking about the future, not just his own, but Liara's as well. She had suffered so much, and yet, she had proven to be more resilient than he had ever expected. She was no longer just the alien girl he had tried to protect, she was someone who had the power to change the course of her own destiny. Jack didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he would stand by her, no matter what. And together, they would face whatever came next, with strength, determination, and a bond that couldn't be broken. The quiet that had settled over the palace was unsettling, but Jack knew that the calm before a storm could be the most dangerous time of all. He paced their small room, his mind racing with thoughts of what was coming next. The Zraxi Council had made their decision, but he still had no idea what the consequences would be. The weight of their laws, so ancient and so rigid, hung over him like a guillotine. He had broken one of their most sacred codes, and there would be a price to pay. But Jack was ready for whatever came. He had promised Liara that he would stand by her, and that promise meant everything. He couldn't let her down now, not when she had already begun to trust him in ways he hadn't expected. Liara sat by the window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. She hadn't said much in the last few days, but Jack could feel her emotions swirling beneath the surface. He knew she was scared, how could she not be? Her life had been turned upside down, and now, thanks to his actions, her future was uncertain. Jack stopped pacing and walked over to where she sat. Her long, silver hair shimmered in the light as she turned her head to face him. "You're thinking too much," Jack said, his voice soft but steady. "You need to rest." She smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Rest? I don't think I can rest until I know what's going to happen to us." Jack sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. "I know. But whatever happens, we'll face it together." She turned her hand to hold his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. "I never imagined my life would turn out this way," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "One moment, everything was normal, and now I don't know what to believe anymore." Jack squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing the back of hers. "I get it. But sometimes life throws things at us we don't expect. That doesn't mean we can't fight for what's right." Liara looked at him, her silver eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in for me," she said softly. "I thought I was done for. But you," her voice trailed off, and Jack could see the raw emotion in her eyes. "I'm not a hero, Liara," he said gently. "I'm just someone who couldn't stand by and watch you suffer." She smiled at him, her expression filled with gratitude. "Maybe you're more of a hero than you think." Jack laughed softly, though the sound was tinged with sadness. "Maybe," he said. "But right now, all I care about is making sure you're safe." As they sat there in the quiet of their room, the weight of their situation seemed to press down on them both. Jack couldn't help but wonder what the Zraxi Council would do. Would they follow through on their threats, or would they show mercy? He didn't know, but he couldn't waste time worrying about what-ifs. He had to focus on the here and now, on the bond he shared with Liara. She had become more than just the alien girl he had defended in the tribunal. She had become someone he cared for deeply, someone whose well-being mattered to him more than anything. As the hours passed, the tension continued to build, but Jack did his best to stay calm, for Liara's sake. She needed him to be strong, even if he wasn't sure what the future held. Finally, there was a knock at the door. Jack stood quickly, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't know who it was, but he knew that whatever was coming, they would have to face it together. As he opened the door, he was greeted by one of the palace guards, who stepped inside without saying a word. Jack's stomach tightened. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady. "The council has reached a decision," the guard said, his tone neutral. Jack nodded, his mind racing. "When do we find out?" The guard glanced at Liara, who had stood as well, her face pale. "Now," the guard replied. The tension in the room grew thicker, the air feeling heavier with each passing second. Jack's hand instinctively tightened around Liara's, and together, they walked out into the corridor, unsure of what awaited them. They had made it this far, but what would the council's decision mean for their future? Jack didn't know. But whatever happened, he wouldn't let Liara face it alone. As Jack and Liara stepped into the dimly lit corridor, the weight of the moment pressed down on them both. The guard led them through the grand halls of the palace, the polished floors reflecting their footsteps in eerie silence. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jack could feel the familiar knot in his stomach tighten with each step. Liara walked beside him, her hand still firmly in his, but he could sense the tremble in her fingers. She was trying to keep it together, but he knew the fear she was hiding behind her calm facade. They stopped in front of a large, ornate door, the only thing separating them from their uncertain future. The guard turned to them, his expression unreadable. "The council awaits," he said before knocking twice on the door. The sound echoed through the corridor, and for a moment, Jack could only hear the pounding of his own heart. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the Zraxi Council seated at a long, imposing table. The leader, still as tall and imposing as before, sat at the head of the table, his piercing gaze fixed on Jack and Liara as they entered. The room was eerily quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Jack could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and he instinctively stood taller, trying to project an air of confidence. But inside, his mind was racing. What would the council decide? Would they uphold the law, or would they show mercy? "You stand here," the leader began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of centuries of tradition, "because of your interference in the tribunal. By your actions, you have broken an ancient law of the Zraxi. The consequences of this cannot be ignored." Jack's stomach dropped, but he held his ground, his voice steady as he spoke. "I understand the consequences. But I did what I had to do. I couldn't stand by and watch her suffer." The leader's gaze softened, though it was only for a moment. "You speak of mercy," the leader said, "but mercy is not a trait we extend lightly. The Zraxi have survived for millennia because we do not allow such breaches of our laws to go unpunished. Liara, standing beside Jack, finally spoke. I don't want to cause any more trouble. I never wanted any of this. I just want to be free, to live my life without fear. Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood tall. Her silver eyes unwavering. Jack could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the weight of her past, but he also saw the strength she had gained over the past few days. The leader studied her for a long moment before turning back to Jack. You have shown compassion, human. Something we rarely see from your kind, he said, his voice thoughtful. But compassion cannot erase the law. You have caused a disturbance, and for that, you must be held accountable. Jack's heart sank. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it out loud still hit him like a blow. What will happen to us? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leader looked at him for a long, tense moment before speaking again. The council has decided that your punishment will not be exile, as is customary for such offenses. Instead, you will be stripped of your position and barred from ever stepping foot on Zarth again. As for the girl, he turned his gaze to Liara, and Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. She will be freed from her charges. The tribunal will be nullified, and her record will be cleared. Liara's eyes widened, and for the first time in days, Jack saw a spark of hope in her expression. You mean? I'm free, she asked, her voice barely audible. The leader nodded once. You are free. But know this, you will never be allowed to return to Zarth. Your people have violated the laws of our world, and that is not something we can forget. Jack's mind spun with the implications of the leader's words. They had won. Liara would be free. But the cost was high. He was being exiled, never to return to a world he had come to care about. And yet, as he looked at Liara, he knew it was worth it. She was free. She would have a chance at a future. Thank you, Liara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jack squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with pride. You don't have to thank me. You earned this. The leader stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You may go. But remember, human, your actions will follow you, no matter where you go. As they left the chamber, Jack felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that they could face it together. As Jack and Liara stepped out of the council chamber, the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy between them. The quiet of the palace seemed almost oppressive, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside Jack. He had expected the council's decision to be harsh, but hearing the words, being exiled from Zarth, was a blow that took a moment to fully sink in. He wasn't angry. He had known the price of his actions, and Liara's freedom had been worth it. But there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel the sting of leaving behind everything he had fought for. Liara, on the other hand, seemed almost lost in the sudden change. She had been granted her freedom, but Jack could tell that the weight of it was still sinking in. She had never truly believed she would be free again. As they walked down the corridor, the echo of their footsteps was the only sound. Jack's hand found hers, and he squeezed it gently, trying to offer some comfort. She looked at him, her silver eyes filled with gratitude and confusion. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice soft. Jack smiled at her, his heart swelling with affection for the alien girl who had somehow become the most important person in his life. You don't need to say anything. You're free, Liara. That's all that matters. She nodded slowly, but the unease still lingered in her eyes. What happens now? She asked. Jack didn't have an answer. He had promised her freedom, but he hadn't thought about what came after that. They couldn't stay on Zarth, it was clear that his actions had made their presence here impossible. But where would they go? What would they do? Jack didn't know, but he was determined to figure it out. We'll figure it out, he said softly. We've made it this far, haven't we? Liara's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was still a trace of sadness in her eyes. I never thought I would make it this far. You're right, though. We've made it. They reached the door to their quarters, and Jack opened it, ushering her inside. The room was still quiet, still the same, but everything had changed. They were no longer just two strangers caught in the web of Zraxi law. Now, they were two people with a future ahead of them, even if they didn't know what it looked like. As the door closed behind them, Jack took a deep breath, letting the silence settle. He had done the right thing, but the road ahead was unclear. Still, one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let Liara face it alone. "Where do you want to go now?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. Liara paused for a moment, looking out the window at the stars beyond. She had never been free before, not truly. The idea of going somewhere, anywhere, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But with Jack by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. "I don't know," she said, turning to him with a look of quiet determination. "But I want to see the stars. I want to see a world where I'm not just someone's prisoner." Jack smiled, his heart lightening at the sight of her strength. "Then we'll find that world," he said. "Together." As the stars twinkled in the distance, Jack and Liara stood at the beginning of a new chapter. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they had a chance to make it their own.